Listen here, man, sometimes life will throw storms at you. Storms you didn't ask for, storms you weren't prepared for, storms that come in and sweep away everything you thought was stable. And when I say storms, I don't just mean raindrops and thunderclaps. I'm talking about those floods of life that show up uninvited, break your walls, test your strength, and demand to know if you're built to last. Now, imagine this on a whole other level. Imagine a nation standing in the middle of a flood. Not just water rushing through the streets, not just rivers overflowing, but the kind of flood that comes with destruction, displacement, and despair. And then imagine, out of nowhere, somebody stands up, looks at that rising tide and says, "We're not going down like this. We're going to find a way to rise, and we're going to rise stronger than ever before." That right there ain't just bravery. That's vision. You see, people often think that saving a nation from floods is about sandbags, pumps, and evacuation plans. But let me tell you something real. It's not just about fighting the water. It's about fighting the mindset that says the water is bigger than you. It's about fighting that defeat that creeps into people's hearts when they see the waves coming. It's about showing them that just because the storm showed up doesn't mean it gets the final say. And let me make this clear. Every time you see a crisis, every time you see chaos, you got to know something. There's opportunity hiding in there. Floods. They wash away houses, crops, and roads. But you know what else they do? They reveal what's weak. They show you which walls were built on shaky ground. They show you which systems weren't ready. And they tell you exactly where you need to build stronger next time. That's how visionaries think. That's how leaders think. They don't just clean up after the water goes down. They rebuild in a way that says, next time this storm comes, we'll be ready. Now let's break this down. Because if you're going to save a nation from floods, you got to think bigger than the flood. You got to think like an architect, an engineer, and a father all at once. You got to build walls, sure, but you also got to build faith. You got to create dams, canals, and drainage. Yes, but you also got to drain the fear that paralyzes people when trouble hits. You got to show them that water may rise, but so can they. See, the problem ain't always the rain. It's the preparation. Rain gonna fall, that's life. Storms gonna come, that's life. But whether or not you drown, that depends on what you did before the storm showed up. That's why when you see somebody stand up with a plan that don't just say, let's survive this flood, but says, let's turn this flood into our stepping stone, you know you're looking at somebody who ain't just leading. They're rewriting the rules. And let me tell you how bold that is. Most folks, when they see a flood, they just say, man, let's get out of here. Let's run. Let's pray it don't come back next year. But a visionary says, nah, we not running. We not begging. We gonna build something so strong, so creative, so unheard of, that even the flood gonna have to respect us. That's not desperation. That's dominance. That's a whole new mindset. But saving a nation from floods ain't just about infrastructure. It's about dignity. It's about making sure people don't have to live in fear every monsoon, don't have to wonder if their home gone, still be standing when they wake up. It's about giving them back their peace of mind. Because when a nation ain't scared of the rain no more, you can't stop that nation. You can't hold it back. Now, let's go deeper, because this is where it gets powerful. You know what a flood really represents? It represents life's challenges coming at you all at once. You got your finances breaking down, your relationships struggling, your health on the edge. It feels like everything is overflowing, like you can't hold it together. And in that moment, you got two choices. You can say, this flood is going to drown me, or you can say, this flood is going to show me how to swim better than I ever have before. And that's exactly what we're talking about when we say saving a nation from floods. It ain't just survival, it's transformation. It's taking the very thing that was sent to break you and using it to build a new foundation. Because guess what? Floodwaters don't just destroy. They also bring new soil, new fertility, new chances to grow crops where nothing grew before. That's how life works. The storm that tries to drown you can also feed you if you know how to use it. And man, let me say this, when a leader steps up with a shocking plan to save people from floods, they ain't just saving lives, they're saving futures. They're saving generations. Because the little boy who doesn't have to be carried away by the current grows up to be the man who builds the next big invention. The little girl who doesn't lose her school in the flood grows up to be the doctor who saves thousands. You never know what you're preserving when you save someone from disaster. But here's the shocking part. The plan wasn't just about building walls to block the water. It was about building bridges that connect people. It was about creating systems where communities take responsibility together, where they learn how to work hand in hand instead of waiting for somebody else to come rescue them. Because real strength doesn't come from one person. It comes from all of us pulling in the same direction, refusing to let the water divide us. And don't miss this. When you save a nation from floods, you're not just solving a problem. You're sending a message to the whole world. You're saying, look at us. Look at how we handle what was supposed to break us. Look at how we turn tragedy into triumph. And let me tell you something. The world listens to that kind of message. That kind of message makes them sit up, makes them take notes, makes them realize they're not the only ones with answers. See, for too long, nations been told they gotta wait for somebody else to come save them. Wait for aid, wait for charity, wait for handouts. But this is different. This is saying, we're not waiting, we're not begging, we're not depending. We're going to stand up and save ourselves, and in doing so, we're going to inspire others to do the same. That's revolutionary. That's shocking. That's powerful. Let me give you this picture. Imagine a flood sweeping through a village. People running, carrying kids on their shoulders, holding on to whatever they can. Panic everywhere. Now imagine instead of despair, they see a system already in place. Channels guiding the water away, shelter standing strong. Food supplies ready, medical teams prepared. Imagine them realizing, wait a second, this time we're safe. Do you understand what that does to a person's spirit? That's not just survival, that's freedom. That's hope restored. And hope is stronger than any dam you could ever build. Hope is what keeps people from giving up when the water's rising. Hope is what makes them rebuild when the storm has passed. And when a leader gives people hope in the middle of a flood, that's when you know the nation ain't just surviving, it's thriving. But don't get it twisted, this ain't easy. It takes guts to look at a raging flood and say, we're going to turn this around. It takes courage to tell people drowning in despair that better days are coming. It takes faith to believe you can outsmart nature itself. And it takes disciplined man, discipline to build the kind of structures, systems, and mindsets that can stand up to the worst the storm has to offer. Now, let's talk about discipline, because without it, floods win every time. Discipline means building when it's sunny, not just scrambling when it's raining. Discipline means teaching children how to protect themselves, how to value resources, how to grow up knowing they are not victims but victors. Discipline means every farmer, every builder, every teacher plays a role in flood defense, because it's not just one man's job, it's everybody's responsibility. And once you got that mindset locked in, floods ain't got nothing on you. Because then the nation doesn't just react to storms. It anticipates them, prepares for them, and uses them And that right there is the secret. The shocking truth that storms don't control you unless you let them. So when I look at this bold plan, I don't just see water management. I see courage management. I see hope management. I see destiny management. I see a nation deciding we ain't going to be defined by what destroys us. We're going to be defined by how we rebuild after. And if you don't take nothing else from this today, take this: floods will always come. In your life, in your family, in your nation, floods will always come. But the measure of your strength is not in whether you can stop the rain. The measure of your strength is whether you can rise when it pours. The measure of your leadership is whether you can look your people in the eye when the water's up to their neck and say, hold on, we got this. We gonna get through. That's the real power here. The plan to save a nation from floods is not just about saving land, it's about saving identity. It's about saying, we are not fragile, we are not helpless, we are strong, resilient, unshakable, and no storm is going to write our story for us. And man, let me close this part with the biggest truth of all. The future ain't waiting on the floods to stop. The future belongs to the ones who know how to dance in the rain, build in the storm, and rise with the tide. And when you see a nation doing exactly that, you better believe the whole world is about to witness something unforgettable. The future belongs to nations that rise with the tide, not drown in it. Let me tell you something that right there is more than just a sentence. That's a whole revelation. Because in life, in leadership, in nations, the tide is always coming. The question ain't whether it's coming. The question is, what you gonna do when it comes? See, too many people, too many leaders, too many nations sit around praying the tide don't rise, hoping the storm don't show up, begging for the rain to stay away. But the truth is, storms don't ask for your permission, floods don't wait for your schedule, tides don't knock before they come in. They just rise. And when they rise, you either rise with them or you go under. Now, when I say rising with the tide, I don't mean ignoring reality. I don't mean pretending the storm ain't real. No, I mean facing it head on, preparing for it, and then using it. Because the tide that drowns one man can carry another man to new shores if he knows how to ride it. And that's the difference between nations that collapse under the weight of crisis and nations that transform crisis into opportunity. The water is the same, but the mindset is different. One sees destruction, the other sees direction. One says, this is the end. The other says, this is the beginning. Let's make it plain. A nation that drowns in the tide is a nation that spends all its energy complaining, pointing fingers, waiting for somebody else to throw them a rope. But a nation that rises with the tide says, hold up. This water is strong, but so are we. This tide is high, but we gonna stand higher. This current is fast, but we gonna move faster. That's how greatness is born. That's how futures are claimed. Because the world don't respect the ones who fold under pressure. It respects the ones who stand tall when everything around them is sinking. See, the tide ain't just about water. It's about pressure. It's about those moments when everything's against you, when your back's against the wall, when you feel like you can't breathe. For a nation, the tide is those floods, those droughts, those economic collapses, those wars, those pandemics. For a person, it's those bills piling up, those relationships breaking down, those dreams slipping away. And every single time, the principle is the same. You're gonna drown if you panic, but you're gonna rise if you adapt. And let me say this, rising with the tide don't mean you escape untouched. You're gonna get wet. You're gonna get knocked around. You might lose some things along the way. But rising means you refuse to let it take your spirit, your will, your destiny. Because destiny ain't about avoiding the storm. It's about learning how to walk on water when the storm hits. Nations that rise with the tide are the ones that stop treating every disaster like a death sentence and start treating it like a wake-up call. Think about it. When the flood waters come, they wash away the weak foundations. They expose what wasn't built right. They show you the cracks you ignored when the sun was shining. And that's painful, but it's also powerful because it gives you a chance to rebuild better. The future belongs to the nations that don't cry about what washed away, but start laying bricks stronger than before. The flood that wipes out one man's house can be the reason another man builds a fortress. That's what rising with the tide looks like. And you know what really separates the ones who rise from the ones who drown? Vision. A leader with no vision sees a flood and says, "This is a tragedy." A leader with vision sees the same flood and says, "This is a teacher." Because the tide always comes to teach you something about your weaknesses, about your strengths, about your limits, about your possibilities. If you let it teach you, you'll grow. If you ignore it, you'll drown. Now let's talk about courage, because vision without courage is just a daydream. When the tide rises, people get scared. Fear makes them freeze, makes them blame, makes them give up. But courage says, yeah, I see the water. Yeah, I feel the pressure. But I also see the future on the other side of this. Nations that rise with the tide are led by courage, not fear. They don't wait for the storm to pass before they act. They move in the middle of it. They dig trenches, they build levees, they evacuate families, they plant seeds. They do what needs to be done. Because courage ain't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even when fear is screaming in your ear. And let me tell you something else. Rising with the tide ain't just about survival. It's about transformation. Because the tide, as destructive as it is, also brings new soil, new minerals, new life. It cleanses, it renews, it reshapes the land. And if you know how to use it, you can grow crops that never grew before. You can build systems that never existed before. You can birth opportunities that nobody ever saw before. The future belongs to the ones who don't just survive the tide, but use it as fertilizer for their destiny. See, nations that drown are nations that cling to the past, holding on to old systems, old excuses, old ways of doing things. They can't let go. So when the tide comes, it rips everything out of their hands. But nations that rise let go willingly. They say, if the tide is taking this, maybe it's because it's time to build something better. That's maturity. That's wisdom. That's the secret to rising. And I'm going to be real with you. It takes discipline. Rising with the tide ain't some accidental miracle. It don't happen just because you hope hard enough. It happens because you plan, you prepare, you put in the work when the skies are clear. Because by the time the rain starts falling, it's too late to start learning how to swim. The future belongs to nations that train for the tide in advance, that teach their children resilience, that build their homes on rock and not sand, that invest in strength instead of waiting on luck. And let me tell you why this is shocking to some people. Because for too long, nations have been told that floods, tides, storms, these are tragedies you just endure. You sit back, wait for foreign aid, wait for pity, wait for help. But rising with the tide flips that script. It says, we don't need to be saved. We are the saviors of our own future. We're not going to wait for rescue. We're going to rescue ourselves. That's power. That's independence. That's dignity. And that's what makes the future yours, not anybody else's. Now picture this with me. A tide comes rushing in. The villages are bracing. The cities are on edge. People are holding their breath. But instead of chaos, there's order. Instead of despair, there's hope. The systems are in place. The people are prepared. The leaders are calm. And when the tide finally pulls back, instead of destruction, what's left is renewal. Crops ready to grow in fresh soil. Houses still standing. Families safe. That's the picture of a nation that rises with the tide. That's the future that belongs to them. And let me connect this to your life, because I know somebody listening right now is going through their own flood.